Well, welcome again, everyone. Thank you very much for making time to join us for what is the second of today's Education Policymaker Network roundtable sessions. As I already said, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat function on Zoom. There'll be plenty of opportunity over the course of the next couple of hours to interact. So those introductions are always useful. My name is Dominic Register. I'm a program director with Salzburg Global Seminar. Salzburg Global Seminar was founded 75 years ago this year, and our core mission across all of the work that we do is to challenge current and future leaders to shape a better world. We do this primarily through what we call strategic convening. Pre-pandemic, this was primarily in person. For the last 2 years, for obvious reasons, it has been through online events and the support and development of online networks. And we very much hope that this will be the year when we can move to a blended approach and combine online support with in-person convening again. But whether it is online or in person, strategic convening involves bringing together diverse groups of people from different countries, very often different sectors at different stages in their careers, all of whom are working on a common challenge, but approaching solution development to that challenge from very different perspectives because of where they work or the nature of their work. And Salzburg Global's role in all of this is to create the space and the conditions that let participants share what they know to be true in their contexts, the insights that they've developed for these challenges in their countries and their contexts, and then talk openly and candidly about the challenges that they face with their work so that we can work together to share solutions that have been developed in one country and could be applied in another, or very often work together to create completely new solutions. We apply this approach to issues from all manner of different sectors, including corporate governance, the future of philanthropy, financial regulation, issues around the rule of law in many different contexts, around healthcare, patient safety, arts and creativity, and of course through education, which is what has brought us all together today. Salzburg Global's education work over the last 5 years has had a particularly strong focus on whole child development or holistic education, and within that a particular focus on social and emotional learning. And last year, with the support of the LEGO Foundation, we were able to launch the Education Policymakers Network. This new network, launched in May of 2021, builds on research that the LEGO Foundation had previously supported through the Brookings Institute around the idea of developing a breadth of skills. I would strongly recommend going back to the original research, which is still on the Brookings Institute website, as it's excellent and still highly relevant to many of the challenges that our different societies and education systems are grappling with today. So the Education Policymakers Network connects policymakers from 21 different countries who work, learn, and innovate together. And the intention is that the network will help support and sustain education reform around the need to develop a breadth of skills. So when we talk about breadth of skills, we're talking about cognitive, creative, physical, social, and emotional skills. And the particular age focus of the Education Policymakers Network is education for 3 to 12-year-olds. Now, the reason why we're focusing on this will be clear, I'm sure, to everyone on the call today, but we're living in a time of convergent crises. There is the learning crisis, which predates the pandemic. There's been a significant escalation in social fragmentation or polarization over the last few years. There is the climate crisis, which is moving front and center in policymaking thinking and everyone's lived experiences. And there is, I think, a collective interest in creating a better post-pandemic world. And finally, all of our economies and societies and all young people in school today will be finding work in a very different economic environment, finding work in what's being described as the fourth industrial revolution. And we believe, and there is an abundance of research to support this, that equipping young people with this kind of breadth of skills will put them in much better place to navigate these different crises and challenges. So we believe that education reform focused on developing a breadth of skills within education systems is an absolutely necessary and legitimate response to all of these different crises. It's not the only thing which is needed, but it is a really fundamental part of the response which is needed. And in many ways, there's been a fantastic attention focused on this because of people's collective experiences of the pandemic and schools being shut down and the way in which ordinary life has been disrupted because of that. But these are not just skills to help us navigate the pandemic. They are, as I've already said, the kinds of skills that we know populations will need to have in greater abundance if we're to find ways of cooperating together to address genuinely existential challenges like the climate crisis and build fairer and more compassionate societies for the future. We believe that a network approach, so bringing together policymakers from different countries who are willing to work, learn and innovate together, will help support and sustain and drive this much needed education reform. We've been very lucky since the beginning of the programme to work with 26 outstanding policymakers, many of whom will be speaking and leading conversations over the next 2 hours. Policymakers, public sector employees are such an important part of any education ecosystem. They're critical for bringing about and shepherding in reforms. And then along with teachers, school leaders, researchers, civil society organizations, absolutely essential for sustaining and maintaining these reforms. When this network first came together, so back in the early summer of last year, like in May of last year, the participants identified 5 topics that were of paramount importance to them in terms of advancing a breadth of skills agenda. And these 5 topics were breadth of skills assessment, new approaches to early years education, innovations in distance learning. The 4th is post-COVID education purpose and priorities. And the 5th, the idea of developing a global breadth of skills curriculum. The network self-organized into 5 learning circles that have been meeting on a reasonably regular basis to share their own respective national or regional experiences of innovation and advancing change in these topics, and to try and delineate the problem and the problems and challenges in new ways. And so each of our breakout roundtables, which represents the first part of today, will focus on one of these challenges. And in a minute, I'm going to ask each of the hosts if they would very briefly introduce their topic. The format will be that the roundtables will last for about an hour. Each session will begin with 1 or 2 of the Policymaker Network members giving a short framing presentation that will summarize some of the discussion that they've been having in the roundtables or some of the insights that they've been able to glean so far, and we'll then move into a series of questions and discussions with each of you. This is not a kind of definitive research presentation type format. These are very discursive sessions, and we're looking to try and harness the collective intelligence, insight and experience of everyone who's part of this webinar to pool new ideas and new thinking that will help the learning circles move forward. After that, we'll take a short break and we will then come back together. And the second half of the program is organized around 3 different country or regional case studies. So there'll be a case study from Portugal with João Costa, the Deputy Minister, talking about some of the recent reforms in Portugal. There'll be a separate case study from Beth Bai, the Commissioner for Early Years Education in the state of Connecticut, talking about some of the early years plans for that state. And there'll be a third presentation looking at education reform in Colombia, which will be given by Constanza Ajuran, who's the Vice Minister for Education, and Constanza will be speaking in Spanish, and there'll be translation in her session. So what we're going to do now is hear really quickly from each of the roundtable hosts who will explain very briefly what their topic is going to focus on. I know that Renan is running slightly late from his meeting, so if we could begin with the early years education. So this breakout group will be hosted by Beth Bai, who's the Commissioner for Connecticut Office of Early Childhood, or co-hosted with Megan Wong, who's the Director of the Training Department at the National Training Center for Kindergartens in the Ministry of Education in Changchun in China. But Beth, if you could give us a quick summary.
Thanks, Dominic. Yes, in terms of the agenda to expand the breadth of skills, that starts early with dispositions for learning. And Megan and I are excited to talk about what's happening in China and the US and those early year priorities. We have been meeting with fellows from South Africa, Uganda, Tanzania, the US, and China, and really showing how early childhood can help to shape a better world for the future, supporting families and children. We're going to explore common themes that we've discovered around access, quality, government funding, and early learning systems. And then China and the US will both speak about some innovations going on there to address some of the access and quality challenges that those countries face. And I'll close by saying it's been remarkable to hear how much we have in common. And China and the US have a lot of the same challenges in this area, but the same opportunities for the future. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you, Beth. So the next group is going to be focusing on innovations in distance learning. And this group is co-hosted by Laila Abu Katusa, who's an educational supervisor and acting head of the Education Training Department in the Ministry of Education in Jordan. And her co-host is Emis Njiro, who's the Deputy Director of Education for the National Council for Nomadic Education in Kenya. But Laila, I think, are you going to give a quick summary?
Good evening, everyone. It's evening here in Jordan. So it's been a pleasure being with you with this lovely group. Our group discussed innovation in distance learning. Well, our presentation focuses on the term innovation itself, definition for innovation, knowing that what might be innovative in a particular environment may not be innovative in another, and knowing that innovation is not only related to students, but also related to teachers, to administrators, and to policymakers. Actually, we are addressing some questions like, for example, what areas should innovation address? And who should foster innovation in distance learning? Is it teachers, is it school principals, or is it ministries of education? We also investigate the challenges that innovation in distance learning encountered. Of course, being a developed country, in Jordan, in the Jordanian context, we encountered many challenges as we were not ready to shift towards distance learning. In our group also, we investigated the experience of 5 countries, that is Jordan, Serbia, Bhutan, Kenya, Ukraine. So we are focusing or listing some information about the experience of Jordan, Kenya, and Ukraine as well. And we end up with trying to answer some questions, the ones I listed, and talking about the challenges, and discuss also some personal experience from the audience in your countries. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laila. The next group is going to be focusing on post-COVID education purpose and priorities, and how the experience of the pandemic has helped shape new thinking around education. And this group is hosted by Rafael Martinez, who's the senior advisor to the Mexican Ministry of Education. So Rafael, could you give us a quick summary, please?
Yes, good morning, good afternoon to all of you. I'm very pleased to host this post-COVID education purpose and priorities roundtable. During this roundtable, we'll be discussing something very important, because we will not return to this world in the same circumstances. So we'll be discussing very important things about the way the students, the teachers, the pupils will interact in this new reality. And we prepared some questions for the discussion that will be focused on the new fundamentals for students to afford challenges for quality education. We will be also discussing the roles of teachers and parents and to strengthen education under these circumstances, and some key issues in formulating sustainable education reform that benefits students all around the world in this post-COVID education scenario. And finally, we would like to listen from you that are very good policymakers some feedback in order to share with us your experiences in your countries, and how do you foresee these circumstances in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rafael. The fourth group is focused on the idea of developing a global breadth of skills curriculum and what the different components could be that go into that represent universal values or universal approaches. And this group, this roundtable, is going to be hosted by Monica Lütke-Entrup, who is the head of early childhood education unit at the Ministry of Education in Lower Saxony in Germany. So Monica, could you give us a very quick summary of your the conversation you anticipate having, please?
Sure. Good evening from Hanover in Germany to all of you. And I would be happy to share the results of a stock-taking effort in our learning circle. We have looked into breadth of skills and how these approaches are implemented in the curricula of the countries of members of our learning circle. So we had the opportunity to compare what has been achieved in Scotland in the past 2 decades, what is going on in Portugal, in Colombia, and in Lebanon. And we have compared the curricula from elementary to primary to secondary education. And learning from each other, we realized that we are all looking into the same direction, but that there are very different circumstances and things to consider in respective countries and cultures. And taking stock what we've got in our countries might then bring about some consensus or some core that could be at the beginning of the development of something that is transnational or international or even global. And so we have started with 5 countries, and we are happy to hear more perspectives on this. And maybe in the course of the 3 years of this network, we'll see if there's something more universal than each country has in its own embedded in its curricula. And we're curious to learn and to share, and we would be happy to welcome you in our session.
Thank you very much, Monica. And the final group is focused on breadth of skills assessment. Shailendra, I wonder if I could put you on the spot and ask you very quickly to unmute and give a summary of the conversation. Shailendra Sharma is the Principal Advisor to the Director of Education in the Government of Delhi and hosted this morning's roundtable on this topic. And I don't think was expecting to be a host again this evening. But Shailendra, if you're there, if you'd be willing to unmute and give a very quick summary, that would be brilliant. This learning circle has been chaired by Renan Carneiro, who's the Secretary of Education for the state of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, and is on his way to join us, but is stuck in traffic, we think, on his way back from another meeting. And then they also had participation from Chimeng Liu in China and Grace Miner in Kenya and Shailendra. So I know from having seen part of their presentation this morning that the focus is on different approaches to measurement and assessment around breadth of skills and the kind of issues that need to be factored in when, you know, the majority of all our education systems are organized around very traditional high stakes measurement approaches. And when we're thinking about measurement and assessment for something like breadth of skills, then there need to be many other factors brought into play. And Renan and Shailendra and the others in the group have been looking at different approaches that have been piloted in their respective systems. Shailendra has some interesting experiences from Delhi's experiments with the happiness curriculum, over the last couple of years, which has taken a very different approach to this. And Renan will be with us by past. So if you choose the assessment group, there will definitely be people presenting with you. So as I said, we've got 5 breakout groups. In a second, Corinna's going to open all 5 breakout rooms and then choose the one that you want to go to. There'll only be the option of choosing one group, but we'll be recording all of the sessions, and then the videos and the PowerPoints that are used will be put up as a YouTube playlist next week or thereabouts, so that you'll be able to access the content, if not the discussion, at a later date. So the 5 topics to choose from are the breadth of skills assessment, new approaches to early years education, innovations in distance learning, post-COVID education priorities and purpose, and the idea of a global breadth of skills curriculum. So you should now be able to choose a breakout room.
I'm just going to jump in here, just because Shailendra is actually with us and Renan still isn't. So maybe we can just give a minute to Shailendra to just talk about the breakout room, just so that we don't go in there without a host. Shailendra, sorry, calling on you again. I saw you had yourself unmuted.
Thank you.
There we go.
Hi, thank you, Corina. Thanks, Dominic. I was not expecting this. I just joined this breakout to just hear what other friends from my learning cycle has to say. We had a very interesting discussion in the morning on breadth of skills assessment. And as Dominic pointed out, we later on also elaborated on the happiness curriculum that Delhi government has introduced, which, see, the theme of our discussion was that education system, though the purpose of education, the objective of education is to build knowledge, skills, attitude, and values among learners. But all along, we have seen that the focus predominantly is on the knowledge aspect, not so much on building the values, skills, or the attitude. So breadth of skills comes across as a very important aspect, where we actually strive to attain the full purpose of education. And one of the biggest impediments we saw that, though the policy document, even the curriculum framework also started talking about breadth of skills in the light of post-2015 development agenda, when this concept itself was articulated for the first time. But in terms of actual action, we do not see much, because there is no system of assessment which has been introduced in a big way. So in the morning, I shared about Delhi's own thrust and quest to introduce breadth of skills through a series of reforms, the latest being the implementation of the new education policy, where again, a lot of things has been said about curriculum and pedagogy, and there are also ideas about assessment. So in the course of the breakout, we discussed about how some of this can be implemented. I would be happy to share some of it as in the breakout. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shailendra. We're a victim of your success this morning, so you've been brought back.
victim of being available there. Thank you.
Corinna, if you could open the rooms, and then we will have about an hour. So choose the breakout room. They're at the bottom of the list of names, and we'll have an hour for these discussions.